After 10 years away, Daniel Matthews returns to Oak Ridge Valley expecting a quick visit, but an unexpected reunion with Sophie Wilson unearths long-buried secrets and lost chances. As truths unravel, can they reclaim the love they never got to have? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. Daniel Matthews stared out the window of his rental car as the familiar landscape of Oak Ridge Valley came into view. The rolling hills, dotted with barns and silos, brought a tightness to his chest he hadn't expected. 10 years. It had been 10 whole years since he'd left this place behind. Now at 35, Daniel barely resembled the shy farm boy who'd once called this place home. His once unruly brown hair was now neatly trimmed. His farm-tanned skin had faded to a healthy glow, and his wardrobe of faded jeans and flannel shirts had been replaced with designer clothes that felt foreign against his skin. Just a quick visit, he reminded himself. Sign the papers, check on the old place, and go back to Chicago. The peaceful countryside flew by as he drove down the winding road toward his family's farm. His parents had passed away 3 years ago within months of each other, but he couldn't bring himself to sell the property. Instead, he hired a management company to keep it running while he built his agricultural technology empire from the safety of a Chicago high-rise. As he rounded the bend that would reveal the Matthews family farmstead, his rental car made a sputtering sound followed by a loud pop. Smoke began billowing from under the hood. "No, no, no," Daniel muttered, carefully steering the car to the shoulder. He got out and lifted the hood, only to be greeted by a cloud of steam. Just perfect. He was still 15 miles outside of town with no one in sight. Daniel pulled out his cell phone, grimacing at the single bar of reception. After several attempts, he finally connected with the local car service. "Oak Ridge Valley Rides," a woman's voice answered. "Hi, I need a pickup. My rental broke down about 15 miles outside of town on Route 16, heading toward the old Matthews farm." There was a pause on the line. "The Matthews place?" the woman asked, her voice suddenly cautious. "Yes, that's right." Another pause. "I'll be there in 20 minutes, she said, and hung up before Daniel could respond. Daniel paced by the roadside, occasionally checking his watch. The countryside was quiet except for the distant mooing of cows and chirping of birds. It was so different from the constant noise of Chicago. Eventually, a slightly battered blue sedan appeared on the horizon. Daniel waved as it approached, relieved that help had arrived. The car pulled up beside him, and the driver's window rolled down. Daniel's heart stopped. Those eyes. He would recognize those warm hazel eyes anywhere. They had haunted his dreams for a decade. "Sophie," he whispered, unable to believe what he was seeing. Sophie Wilson stared back at him, her knuckles white as she gripped the steering wheel. The confident, vibrant girl he had known in college had been replaced by a woman with tired eyes and worry lines etched around her mouth. Her once long, flowing chestnut hair was now cut in a practical bob, and there was a wariness in her expression. That hadn't been there before. "Hello, Daniel," she said flatly. "Get in. I'll take you to town." Daniel stood frozen for a moment before grabbing his suitcase from the rental car and sliding into the back seat of Sophie's taxi. "I didn't know you were back in Oak Ridge," Sophie said, her eyes meeting his in the rearview mirror before quickly looking away. "Just got in today," Daniel replied, still trying to process the shock. The car was a rental from the airport. Sophie nodded and focused on the road ahead. The silence between them was deafening. "So, you're driving a cab now?" Daniel finally asked, immediately regretting how condescending it sounded. Sophie's jaw tightened. "Among other things, not all of us can become millionaires." Daniel winced. "I didn't mean it like that." "How did you mean it then?" she challenged. The last I heard, you were heading to New York to become a veterinarian." Sophie's eyes flickered with something, pain, regret, anger. Daniel couldn't tell. "Plans change," she said curtly. Daniel nodded, choosing to remain silent. The tension in the car was so thick, he could almost touch it. As they drove through the familiar countryside, memories flooded back. He and Sophie had met during their sophomore year at the state university. They were both farm kids on scholarship, and they'd bonded over late-night study sessions for their agricultural science classes. She had been everything he wasn't: outgoing, confident, fearless. He had fallen for her hard and fast, but had never worked up the courage to tell her how he felt. They remained close friends throughout college, until one day during their senior year, Sophie simply disappeared. No goodbye, no explanation. She just stopped showing up to classes, and when he went to her apartment, her roommate said she'd moved out. Daniel had tried to find her, had called and texted for months, but Sophie had vanished from his life as suddenly as she had entered. And now here she was. "Where are you staying?" Sophie asked, breaking the silence. "I was planning to stay at the farm. Is the main house still in good condition?" "Your management company keeps everything in working order," Sophie replied. There was an edge to her voice that Daniel couldn't quite place. "You know about the management company?" Sophie's eyes met his in the mirror again. "It's a small town, Daniel. Everyone knows everything." The car fell silent again as they approached the outskirts of town. The familiar sights of Oak Ridge Valley came into view. The old water tower with the town name painted in fading letters, the town square with its gazebo, and Main Street lined with small businesses. "A lot of these places are new," Daniel observed, noting several shops that hadn't been there when he left. After the factory shut down, the town reinvented itself as a weekend destination for city folks. Antique shops, farm-to-table restaurants, that sort of thing. "And how's that working out?" "It keeps us afloat," Sophie said. "Barely." As they passed the town veterinary clinic, Sophie's gaze lingered on the building. Daniel noticed the sign. "Out front, Dr. Wilson's Animal Care." "Wilson, is that your family's practice now?" he asked, surprised. Sophie's hands tightened on the steering wheel again. "It's my brother's. He took over after my dad retired." "And you work there too?" Sophie shook her head. "I drive the cab, and I help out at Millie's diner on weekends." Daniel frowned. "But you were studying to be a vet. You were top of our class." "I told you plans change," she repeated, her tone making it clear the subject was closed. They continued through town, and Daniel couldn't help but notice the curious glances from people on the sidewalks. News of his return would spread like wildfire. "I'll need a rental car," Daniel said. "Is there a place in town?" "Johnson's garage can probably help you out," Sophie replied. "Want me to drop you there first?" Daniel hesitated. "Actually, could you take me to the farm? I'd like to get settled, and I can call about a car later." Sophie seemed to tense up even more at this request, but she nodded and turned the car onto the familiar road that led to the Matthews farm. As they approached the long driveway lined with oak trees, Daniel felt a mix of emotions: nostalgia, grief, and a strange sense of homecoming he hadn't expected. The farmhouse came into view, its white paint gleaming in the afternoon sun, the wraparound porch exactly as he remembered it. Sophie pulled up to the front of the house and put the car in park but didn't turn off the engine. "Here you are," she said, staring straight ahead. Daniel opened the car door but paused before getting out. "Sophie, it's really good to see you. Maybe we could catch up sometime." Sophie finally turned to look at him directly. "Why are you really back, Daniel, after all this time?" The question caught him off guard. "I need to sign some papers for a new management contract. The old one is expiring." Sophie studied his face as if searching for the truth. "So you're not staying?" "No. Just a week, maybe less." Something flickered across her face. Relief, disappointment, Daniel couldn't tell. "Well then, I guess there's not much point in catching up, is there?" Sophie said, her voice softer now, almost sad. Before Daniel could respond, the front door of the farmhouse flew open, and an elderly woman emerged onto the porch, waving enthusiastically. "Daniel Matthews! Look at you, all grown up and handsome. As the devil himself." Daniel broke into a genuine smile. "Mrs. Atkins?" The woman who had been his parents' housekeeper for decades hurried down the steps to greet him. She was older now, her hair completely silver, but her warm smile was exactly the same. "We've been expecting you," Mrs. Atkins said, enveloping him in a hug that smelled of cinnamon and vanilla. "We?" Daniel asked, raising an eyebrow. Mrs. Atkins looked over at Sophie, who was still sitting in the driver's seat. "Sophie, dear, aren't you coming in? I made fresh lemonade." Daniel turned to Sophie, surprised. "You two know each other?" An uncomfortable look passed between the two women. "Sophie helps me with the books sometimes," Mrs. Atkins explained vaguely. "She's good with numbers. Sophie finally turned off the engine and reluctantly got out of the car. "I should get back to town, Mrs. A. I have another pickup at 4. "Nonsense, you can spare a few minutes for lemonade. Besides, I'm sure you and Daniel have a lot to catch up on." Mrs. Atkins was already heading back to the house, leaving them little choice but to follow. Inside, the farmhouse was exactly as Daniel remembered it, the same worn but comfortable furniture, the same family photos on the walls, the same scent of home that hit him like a physical force, making his throat tighten with unexpected emotion. In the kitchen, Mrs. Atkins busied herself pouring lemonade while Daniel and Sophie sat awkwardly at the table. "So how long have you been working with Mrs. Atkins?" Daniel asked, trying to break the tension. "About 5 years," Sophie replied. "After my dad got sick, I needed extra work." "I'm sorry to hear about your dad. He's in a care facility. Now Alzheimer's." Sophie's voice was flat, matter-of-fact, but Daniel could sense the pain behind her words. "I didn't know." "How could you? You've been gone for 10 years. The accusation hung in the air between them. Mrs. Atkins placed glasses of lemonade in front of them, seemingly oblivious to the tension. "Now, Daniel, you'll be pleased to know the farm is doing wonderfully. The management company has made some smart decisions, and the organic certification has increased profits by 30%. Daniel nodded, grateful for the change of subject. "That's good to hear. How's the staff?" "Most of the old hands are still here. Joe Peterson is the foreman now, and he runs a tight ship. The seasonal workers are mostly the same families from down south, coming back year after year." As Mrs. Atkins chatted about the farm, Daniel noticed Sophie becoming increasingly uncomfortable, fidgeting with her glass and checking her watch. "I really should go," Sophie said, standing abruptly. "Thank you for the lemonade, Mrs. A." "Oh, before you leave, dear, don't forget those papers for the community center fundraiser. I left them in the study." Sophie nodded and disappeared down the hallway, leaving Daniel alone with Mrs. Atkins. "What's really going on here, Mrs. A?" Daniel asked quietly. "Why is Sophie so different?" Mrs. Atkins sighed and patted his hand. "Life hasn't been easy for her, Daniel. She had to give up a lot of dreams when she came back to Oak Ridge. But why did she come back? What happened in college?" Mrs. Atkins opened her mouth to respond, but was interrupted by Sophie's return. "Got them," Sophie said, tucking a folder into her bag. She avoided Daniel's eyes as she headed for the door. "I'll see you at the committee meeting tomorrow, Mrs. A." "Sophie, wait," Daniel called, following her onto the porch. "Can I at least get your number, in case I need another ride while I'm here?" Sophie hesitated, then pulled a business card from her pocket. "Oak Ridge Valley Rides. The number goes to my cell phone." Daniel took the card, his fingers brushing against hers. Sophie pulled her hand back quickly, as if burned by the contact. "Goodbye, Daniel," she said, hurrying down the steps to her car. "Sophie," he called after her. "Whatever happened back then, I'm sorry if I did something wrong." Sophie paused, her back to him. For a moment, Daniel thought she might turn around, might finally give him the explanation he'd waited 10 years to hear. But instead, she continued to her car without looking back. As Sophie's car disappeared down the driveway, Mrs. Atkins joined Daniel on the porch. "Give her time," the older woman advised. "She's carrying a heavy burden." "What kind of burden?" Daniel asked. Mrs. Atkins shook her head. "It's not my story to tell, but if you're only here for a week, Daniel, maybe it's best to leave the past in the past." But as Daniel watched the dust settling on the driveway, he knew that would be impossible. Seeing Sophie again had awakened something he'd thought long buried, questions without answers, feelings without resolution, and a nagging sense that he had missed something important all those years ago. Later that evening, after Mrs. Atkins had gone home to her cottage on the edge of the property, Daniel sat on the porch swing, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. The farm stretched out before him, fields of corn and wheat, orchards heavy with early summer fruit, pastures where cattle grazed lazily. This was the legacy his parents had built, the land that had shaped him. Yet he had walked away from it, all convinced there was nothing here for him after Sophie's disappearance. Now fate had thrown them back together, and Daniel couldn't ignore the feeling that this was his second chance to find out the truth, to understand why Sophie had left, and perhaps to finally tell her what he should have said 10 years ago. His phone buzzed with a message. It was from his assistant in Chicago, reminding him about the management contract meeting scheduled for tomorrow afternoon. Business as usual. But as Daniel stared at the screen, he realized that for the first time in years, business was the last thing on his mind. He scrolled through his contacts and found the number from Sophie's card. Before he could talk himself out of it, he typed a message. "Thank you for the ride today. I'd like to talk, really talk, before I leave town. Please, Daniel." Hit send and waited, watching as the message was delivered, then read. The reply came several minutes later. "Some things are better left in the past. Good night, Daniel." Daniel stared at the message, feeling a mixture of frustration and determination. Sophie was hiding something important enough to make her avoid him for a decade. And he was going to find out what it was, even if he had to extend his stay in Oak Ridge to do it. As the last light faded from the sky, Daniel made a decision. He wouldn't leave Oak Ridge until he knew the truth. About Sophie, about the past, and about what might still be possible for their future. The morning sun streamed through the kitchen windows as Daniel sipped his coffee. He'd been up since dawn, his body instinctively reverting to farm hours, despite years of city living. Last night he tossed and turned, his mind replaying every moment of his unexpected reunion with Sophie. A knock at the back door interrupted his thoughts. Mrs. Atkins entered without waiting for an answer, carrying a basket of fresh eggs and homemade bread. "Good morning. Thought you might want a proper breakfast," she said cheerfully, setting down her offerings. "Store-bought bread just doesn't compare." "You didn't have to do that," Daniel said, smiling despite himself. "Nonsense. Looking after you is part of my job." Mrs. Atkins began cracking eggs into a bowl. "Besides, you look like those fancy Chicago restaurants haven't been feeding you properly," Daniel chuckled. "I can cook for myself, you know." Mrs. Atkins replied, clearly unconvinced. "So, what's on your agenda today?" "Meeting with the management company at 2. Until then, I thought I'd walk the property, see how things have changed." Mrs. Atkins nodded approvingly. "The South Orchard has those new apple varieties your mother always wanted to try, and Joe added a lavender field by the east pasture. It's quite beautiful when it's in bloom." As they chatted, Daniel steered the conversation toward the topic that had kept him awake most of the night. Mrs. A, about Sophie, the older woman's expression became guarded. "What about her?" "Something happened in college. Something that made her come back here and give up on becoming a vet. I need to know what it was." Mrs. Atkins sighed as she flipped an omelette. "Daniel, if Sophie wanted you to know, she would tell you herself. But she won't even talk to me. She acts like I'm the enemy." Mrs. Atkins placed a plate in front of him. "Sometimes the past is painful. Sometimes we have good reasons for keeping secrets." Daniel took a bite of the omelette but barely tasted it. "I thought we were friends, best friends. Then one day she was just gone. No explanation, no goodbye. Do you know how that felt?" Mrs. Atkins' expression softened. "I can imagine, but have you considered that maybe she was protecting you? Or protecting herself?" Before Daniel could respond, his phone rang. It was the management company, asking to reschedule their meeting for the following day due to a family emergency. Daniel agreed, suddenly finding himself with a free day. After breakfast, he borrowed Mrs. Atkins' old pickup truck and headed into town. He told himself he needed groceries, but in truth he was hoping to run into Sophie. Oak Ridge Valley's Main Street was busier than he remembered, with tourists browsing the antique shops and small cafes. Daniel parked in front of Millie's diner, recalling that Sophie worked there on weekends. It was Tuesday, but maybe someone there could tell him more about her. The bell above the door jingled as he entered. The diner was about half full, mostly with locals who glanced up at him with undisguised curiosity. Behind the counter, a heavy-set woman with flaming red hair looked up and broke into a wide smile. "Well, if it isn't Daniel Matthews, the prodigal son returns." Daniel recognized her immediately. "Millie, you haven't changed a bit." Millie snorted. "Liar. I've put on 20 pounds and got myself a hip replacement, but you look like $1,000,000 bucks, which I hear is what you're worth these days." Daniel felt his face redden. "Don't believe everything you hear." "Oh, honey, in this town I believe about 10% of what I hear." The trick is knowing which 10%. She gestured to a stool at the counter. Coffee. Daniel nodded and sat down. Sophie mentioned she works here sometimes. Millie's eyebrows rose as she poured his coffee. Did she now? Didn't realize you two had reconnected? We haven't. Not really. Her taxi picked me up yesterday when my rental broke down. Ah, Millie said, nodding knowingly. That explains why she was in such a mood this morning. She was here this morning, left about an hour ago, said she had to take her dad to a doctor's appointment in Bedford. Daniel sipped his coffee. I heard about her dad. That must be hard on her. Millie's expression grew serious. Harder than most know. She's been supporting both her parents since her mum's stroke 5 years ago. Then her dad's mind started to go and, well, she shook her head. That girl carries the weight of the world on her shoulders. What about her brother, the vet? Millie rolled her eyes. Mark, that boy wouldn't recognize responsibility if it bit him on the backside. He's got the title, but Sophie does half the work at the clinic too, when she's not driving the cab or waiting tables here. Daniel frowned. Why doesn't she just become a vet herself? She was studying for it. Millie gave him a strange look. You really don't know, do you? Know what? The bell above the door jingled again, and Millie glanced over his shoulder. Well, here's your chance to ask her yourself. Daniel turned to see Sophie entering the diner. She froze when she spotted him at the counter, her expression darkening. For a moment he thought she might turn and leave, but instead she squared her shoulders and approached. Millie, I forgot my... Her words trailed off as she noticed a purse hanging on a hook behind the counter. Never mind. I see it. Sophie. Wilson, don't you dare grab that purse and run out, Millie scolded. Sit your behind down and have some pie, apple fresh this morning. Sophie glanced at Daniel, then at the determined expression on Millie's face, and reluctantly sat down 2 stools away from him. I thought you had a doctor's appointment with your dad, Millie said, cutting a generous slice of pie. Dr. Simmons called. Had to reschedule for tomorrow. Sophie took the pie but didn't eat it. I didn't know you were coming here, she said to Daniel, her tone defensive. I needed groceries, he replied, gesturing to the non-existent shopping bags by his feet. A reluctant smile tugged at the corner of Sophie's mouth. Still a terrible liar, I see. The small crack in her armor gave Daniel courage. Since we both have unexpected free time, maybe we could talk. Sophie's expression closed up again. There's nothing to talk about. I think there is. Daniel hesitated, then added softly, I missed you, Sophie. When you disappeared from school, I looked everywhere for you. Something flashed in Sophie's eyes, pain, regret, or maybe anger. I didn't disappear, I just came home where I belonged. Without a word to me, we were best friends. Sophie stared down at her untouched pie. It was complicated. Then uncomplicate it for me, Daniel urged. Help me understand. Before Sophie could respond, the diner door opened again, and a well-dressed man in his 30s entered. He spotted Sophie and frowned. There you are, he said, approaching them. I've been calling you for an hour. Sophie tensed visibly. Mark, what do you need? Daniel recognized the name. Sophie's brother, the vet. Mark barely glanced at Daniel. Mrs. Peterson's mare is foaling and there are complications. I need an extra set of hands. Sophie nodded and stood up. Let me get my bag from the car. No. Time, just come now. I've got everything we need at the clinic. As Sophie grabbed her purse, she finally looked at Daniel. I have to go. Wait, Daniel said, standing too. Can I help? I grew up around horses. Mark gave Daniel a dismissive once-over. And who exactly are you? Daniel Matthews, he replied. Extending his hand, Mark's expression changed immediately, recognition and calculation replacing dismissal. Matthews? The Matthews farm, Daniel Matthews? The same, Daniel confirmed, disliking the sudden interest in Mark's eyes. Well, well, Mark said, shaking his hand with newfound enthusiasm. Your family's farm is one of our biggest clients, or at least your management company is. Mark, we need to go, Sophie interrupted, clearly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. Right the mare, Mark said, returning his attention to his sister. And yes, Mr. Matthews, we could use another set of hands if you're offering. Before Sophie could protest, Daniel was following them out to Mark's truck. The tension was palpable as they drove to the Peterson farm, with Sophie wedged between the two men in the cab of the pickup. "So, how do you two know each other?" Mark asked, glancing between them. "College," Sophie answered curtly. "We were in the same program," Daniel added. "Agricultural sciences." Mark raised an eyebrow. "Right, before Sophie had to quit. Shame about that. She would have made a better vet than me, honestly." Sophie shot her brother a warning look, which he either didn't notice or chose to ignore. "I always wondered why you left school," Daniel said carefully, "especially so close to graduating." "Let's focus on the mare," Sophie replied, staring straight ahead. They arrived at the Peterson farm, a modest operation with a small herd of horses. In the stable, they found Mrs. Peterson, a middle-aged woman with worry etched on her face, standing outside a stall where a chestnut mare was clearly in distress. "Thank goodness you're here," Mrs. Peterson said. "Penny's been laboring for hours, but something's not right." Mark immediately took charge, examining the mare while Sophie prepared supplies from his medical bag. Daniel stood back, uncertain of his role until Sophie handed him a pair of gloves. "Make yourself useful," she said. "Hold these compresses. If I need them, I'll ask." For the next hour, Daniel watched as Sophie and Mark worked together seamlessly to help the struggling mare. Despite Mark's title as the town vet, it was clear that Sophie was equally skilled, anticipating his needs and often suggesting approaches before he could ask. Finally, with one last push from the exhausted mare, a wet, wobbly foal emerged. Sophie quickly cleared its airways and rubbed it vigorously with clean towels, while Mark tended to the mother. "It's a filly," Sophie announced, a rare smile lighting up her face as the newborn blinked up at her with large, dark eyes. Mrs. Peterson wiped away tears of relief. "She's beautiful." Daniel found himself captivated, not by the miracle of birth they had just witnessed, but by the transformation in Sophie. For that moment, as she gently helped the foal take its first wobbly steps toward its mother, the guarded, bitter woman from the taxi was gone. In her place was the Sophie he remembered, passionate, caring, alive with purpose. As they cleaned up, Daniel helped Sophie load supplies back into Mark's truck. They worked in comfortable silence until Mark approached with Mrs. Peterson. "Sophie, can you finish up here? I promised Dr. Lee in Bedford I'd consult on that stallion with the respiratory issue." Sophie nodded. "I'll get a ride back." "I can take you," Daniel offered quickly. Mark gave him a knowing smile. "Perfect. Mrs. Peterson was just saying she made a fresh batch of lemonade. Maybe you two would like some before you head back." Before either could respond, Mark was gone, climbing into his truck with a wave. Mrs. Peterson, sensing the awkwardness, tactfully mentioned something about checking on her grandchildren and disappeared toward the house. Left alone in the stable, Sophie busied herself with one last check on the mare and foal. Daniel leaned against the stall door watching her. "You're really good at this," he said softly. "Mark was right. You would have made an amazing vet." Sophie's hands stilled. "Sometimes life doesn't work out the way we plan." "Why didn't it, Sophie? What happened?" She finally looked at him, her defenses visibly lowering. "You really don't know, do you?" Daniel shook his head. Sophie seemed to be waging an internal battle. Finally, she sighed. "I got pregnant, Daniel." The words hit him like a physical blow. "Pregnant? When? How? I mean, who?" "Senior year," Sophie interrupted. "Right before midterms, that's why I left school." Daniel's mind raced. "But we were together all the time back then. You never mentioned dating anyone." Sophie's laugh was hollow. "No, I didn't. So the baby's father was someone I cared about very deeply. Someone who had big dreams that didn't include a baby or a small-town girl tying him down." Daniel felt sick. "You thought I wouldn't want to know. You thought I wouldn't care." Sophie's eyes widened. "What are you talking about?" "The baby. My baby. That's what you're saying, isn't it?" Sophie stared at him, confusion replacing shock. "Your baby?" "Daniel, no, it wasn't yours. How could it be? We never—" It was Daniel's turn to be confused. "Then whose? Does it matter?" Sophie turned away, her voice tight. "It was a mistake. A one-night thing with someone passing through town during spring break. He was gone before I even knew I was pregnant." Daniel tried to process this information. "But why did you leave without telling me?" I would have helped you. We were friends. Sophie's shoulders slumped. Because I was ashamed. And because you were already interviewing for that big job in Chicago. You were so excited about leaving this place behind, about your big plans. I couldn't bear to be the friend who needed rescuing. Daniel moved closer, gently turning her to face him. What happened to the baby? Tears filled Sophie's eyes. I lost it 5 months along. The doctors said it was just one of those things that happens sometimes. Her voice broke. After that, I couldn't go back to school. My mom had her stroke right around then, and my dad needed help with the bills, so I stayed, got a job, then another, and another. Daniel felt an overwhelming urge to pull her into his arms, but her body language warned him away. I'm so sorry, Sophie, for everything you went through, for not being there. She wiped away a tear. It wasn't your responsibility. Maybe not, but I cared about you, I still do. Sophie looked up at him, her expression vulnerable in a way he hadn't seen since college. Why did you never call after that first year? I thought maybe once you were settled in Chicago. Daniel frowned. What are you talking about? I called for months after you left. I texted, I emailed. Eventually I came back to look for you. But your old roommate said you didn't want to be found. Sophie shook her head. That's not true. I never got any calls or messages from you after the first 2 months, and Jen never told me you came looking for me. They stared at each other, the realization dawning that something or someone had deliberately kept them apart. Jen was dating Mark back then, Sophie said slowly, her expression darkening. She told me you'd moved on, that you were dating some banker's daughter in Chicago. Daniel's jaw tightened. I never dated any banker's daughter. There was nobody after. He stopped, catching himself before saying too much. After what? Sophie pressed. After you, Daniel admitted. I dated, sure, but nothing serious. No one ever measured up to... He let the words hang between them, unwilling to reveal too much. When they were still on such fragile ground, the sound of a car horn broke the moment. They turned to see an Oak Ridge Valley Rides taxi pulling up outside the stable. That's Jimmy, Sophie said, grabbing her purse. I texted him to pick me up. She hesitated, then added, I think we've said enough. For one day. Daniel wanted to argue, wanted to finish what they'd started, but he could see Sophie rebuilding her walls with every passing second. At least let me buy you dinner. Tomorrow night. Please. Sophie paused at the stable door. Why? Daniel, what's the point? You'll be gone in a few days, back to your real life in Chicago. Maybe I'm starting to remember what my real life was supposed to be, he said softly. Something flickered in Sophie's eyes. Hope, maybe, or fear. I have. To work tomorrow night, Millie's. Then I'll come to the diner, 6 o'clock. Sophie hesitated, then nodded once before hurrying to the waiting taxi. Daniel watched her go, his mind reeling from everything he'd learned. Sophie had been pregnant, had lost a baby, had been told lies about him moving on, and all while caring for sick parents and working multiple jobs to stay afloat. He felt a surge of anger at Mark, at Jen, at whoever had interfered in their lives. But more than that, he felt a renewed determination to uncover the whole truth, and perhaps to finally tell Sophie what he should have told her 10 years ago. As he walked back to Mrs. Peterson's house to ask for a ride into town, Daniel pulled out his phone and called his assistant in Chicago. Cancel my return flight, he said when she answered, and clear my schedule for the next 2 weeks. Something's come up. Whatever had kept him and Sophie apart, whatever secrets still remained, Daniel was determined to uncover them all, no matter how long it took. Daniel arrived at Millie's diner at 5:45 the next evening, his stomach in knots. He'd spent the day walking the farm, reacquainting himself with the land that had shaped his childhood. Every hill and creek, every barn and field had brought back memories, many of them involving Sophie. The bell jingled as he entered the diner. It was the dinner rush, and nearly every table was full. Daniel spotted Sophie immediately, dressed in a blue waitress uniform, her hair pulled back in a practical ponytail as she balanced plates of food with practiced ease. She glanced up when he entered, and their eyes met across the crowded room. For a brief moment, Her professional smile softened into something genuine before she turned away to deliver an order to a family in a corner booth. Millie waved to him from behind the counter. "Sit wherever you can find a spot, honey. We're packed tonight." Daniel slid into the only empty seat, a stool at the counter, and watched Sophie work. She moved efficiently between tables, smiling and chatting with customers, many of whom she clearly knew well. This was her world, he realized, a world he had once been part of, but had left behind. After a few minutes, Sophie approached the counter with a coffee pot. "You're early," she said, filling a mug for him. "Thought I'd watch a professional at work," Daniel replied with a smile. A faint blush colored Sophie's cheeks. "I get off at 7, not 6, is that okay?" "I'll wait," he assured her. "Take your time." Millie appeared beside him, wiping her hands on her apron. "Don't be ridiculous. Sophie, take your dinner break now. I can handle things for half an hour." Sophie glanced around at the busy diner. "But no buts," Millie insisted. "That booth in the back just cleared. Go sit down before someone else grabs it." Sophie hesitated, then nodded. "Let me put in an order first." She turned to Daniel. "Still like your burger with extra pickles?" Daniel blinked in surprise. "You remember that?" Sophie shrugged. But there was a slight smile on her lips. Hard to forget when someone asks for a burger with more pickles than meat. As they settled into the booth, an awkward silence fell between them. So much had been said yesterday, yet there was still so much unsaid. "How's your dad?" Daniel finally asked. "Did the appointment go okay?" Sophie nodded, grateful for the safe topic. "No changes, which is actually good news at this stage. The doctor says he's stable. And your mom?" "Better physically." The last stroke left her with some speech difficulties, but her mind is still sharp as ever. Their food arrived. A burger with extra pickles for Daniel and a chicken salad for Sophie. They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes before Daniel spoke again. "I've been thinking about what you told me yesterday, about the baby, and about how you never got my calls after those first 2 months." Sophie set down her fork. "I've been thinking about that too. It seems like someone went to a lot of trouble to keep us apart." "My money's on your brother," Daniel said, his voice hardening. "Mark never liked me much in college." Sophie sighed. "Mark has always been protective, but interfering like that?" She shook her head. "That's a whole other level. What would he have to gain by keeping us apart?" Sophie pushed a piece of lettuce around her plate. "I'm not sure, unless—" She looked up suddenly. "The clinic, my dad's practice, Mark always wanted it, but Dad had promised it to me once I finished vet school." Daniel frowned. "So if you left school and never went back, the practice would eventually go to him," Sophie finished. "Which is exactly what happened." "That's pretty cold even for Mark." Sophie's expression was troubled. "He's my brother, Daniel. I don't want to believe he'd do something like that." "Maybe he thought he was protecting you," Daniel suggested, though he didn't believe it himself. "From what? From you?" Sophie shook her head. "You were never anything but kind to me." Daniel's heart warmed at her words. "I cared about you, Sophie, more than you knew." Their eyes met across the table, and something electric passed between them. Sophie was the first to look away. "Tell me about Chicago," she said, clearly changing the subject. "You're some big-shot CEO now?" Daniel chuckled. "Not exactly. I developed a more efficient irrigation system during my time at the university, got a patent after graduation, and started a company. It took off faster than I expected." "Mrs. Atkins says you're worth millions," Sophie teased. "Mrs. Atkins talks too much," Daniel replied with a grin, "but business has been good. We're helping farms across the Midwest conserve water while increasing yields." "Sounds impressive," Sophie said, and he could tell she meant it. "What about you?" Daniel asked. "Besides driving the cab and working here, I mean, Millie mentioned you help out at the clinic too." Sophie nodded. "Mark may have the title, but he can't be bothered with the day-to-day stuff. I handle most of the routine appointments and paperwork. So you're practically a vet already, just without the degree." "I'm not complaining," Sophie said quickly. "It worked out this way for a reason." "But you could go back to school," Daniel suggested. "Finish your degree, it's never too late." Something shuddered in Sophie's expression. With what time? With what money? My parents need me, Daniel. The reality is, this is my life now. Before Daniel could respond, the bell above the door jingled and Mark Wilson entered the diner. His gaze swept the room, landing on Sophie and Daniel in their corner booth. His eyes narrowed as he made his way toward them. Sophie, there you. Mark said, his tone pleasant but his eyes cold. I've been trying to reach you. I'm on my dinner break, Sophie replied. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong, just wanted to let you know I handled the Coleman account myself. No need for you to go out there tomorrow, Sophie frowned. But Mrs. Coleman specifically asked for me. Her cat won't let anyone else examine her, Mark waved a dismissive hand. I managed fine, the cat just needed some extra treats. He turned to Daniel with a forced smile. How's your stay in Oak Ridge going, Matthews? Getting reacquainted with small-town life? It has its charms, Daniel replied. Coolly, Mark's smile didn't reach his eyes. Well, don't get too comfortable. I hear Chicago calling your name. The implication was clear. Don't get attached to Sophie. You're leaving anyway. Actually, I've extended my stay, Daniel said. There are some things here that need my attention. Mark's smile faltered. Is that right? Well, don't let us simple country folk keep you from your important business too long. Mark, Sophie warned, clearly embarrassed by her brother's tone. Mark ignored her, his attention fixed on Daniel. I heard you're meeting with Turner Management. Tomorrow. Renewing the contract. Daniel raised an eyebrow. That's between me and Turner Management. Of course, Mark backpedaled. It's just that their decisions affect a lot of people around here. The clinic has a contract with them for the livestock care on your property. Now Daniel understood. Mark was worried about losing business if Daniel changed management companies. Haven't made any decisions yet, Daniel said diplomatically. Mark nodded, seemingly satisfied. Well, I should let you finish your dinner. Sophie, don't forget about Dad's medication tonight. I'll be out of town. Again? Sophie asked, her frustration evident. You were supposed to take the night shift at the care facility. I have plans. Mark glanced between her and Daniel. I'm sure your plans can wait. Family first, right, sis? Before Sophie could respond, Mark strode away, leaving an uncomfortable silence in his wake. I'm sorry about him, Sophie said once he was gone. He's not usually so obvious. Daniel supplied with a wry smile. Sophie laughed despite herself. I was going to say rude, but obvious works too. Daniel reached across the table and took her hand. Don't cancel your plans. I'll take the night shift with your dad. Sophie's eyes widened. What? No, Daniel, you can't do that. You don't even know him. So introduce me, Daniel said simply. I'd like to meet your parents anyway. It's not that simple. The night shift is hard. Dad gets confused after dark, sometimes agitated. It can be challenging. Daniel squeezed her hand. I think I can handle it, unless you're embarrassed to have me meet your family. Of course not, Sophie protested. It's just what? Sophie bit her lip. You're leaving, Daniel, going back to Chicago, to your real life. What's the point of getting involved in my messy family situation? Daniel held her gaze steadily. Maybe I'm reassessing what my real life should be. The weight of his words hung between them. Sophie stared at him, searching his face for any sign of insincerity. You don't mean that, she said finally. You have a company, a career, a whole life in Chicago. I have an apartment and an office, Daniel corrected. That's not the same as a life. Before Sophie could respond, Millie appeared at their table. Break's over, sugar. Friday night fish fry crowd is starting to roll in. Sophie nodded and stood up, clearly relieved by the interruption. I should get back to work. Think about what I said, Daniel urged. About tonight, your dad. Sophie hesitated, then nodded. I'll think about it. For the next hour, Daniel nursed, a cup of coffee at the counter, watching Sophie work and occasionally chatting with Millie when she wasn't busy. He was about to give up and head back to the farm when Sophie approached him, looking nervous but determined. If you're serious about helping tonight, the care facility is on Oak Street. Dad's in room 210. I need to be there at 8. Daniel's heart leapt. I'll be there. I should warn you that it won't be easy, Daniel finished for her. I got that, but you've been doing this alone for too long, Sophie. Let someone help you for once. Something in her expression softened. Thank you. At 8 o'clock, Daniel found himself walking through the doors of Oak Ridge Valley Care Center, a modestly sized facility on the edge of town. Sophie was waiting in the lobby, looking tired but grateful to see him. You actually came, she said, sounding surprised. I said I would, Daniel reminded her. I keep my promises. Sophie led him down a hallway painted in soothing pastels. Dad's having a good day, so it might not be too difficult. Just be patient if he gets confused about who you are. She stopped outside a door marked 210 and took a deep breath before entering. Inside, a thin man with Sophie's hazel eyes sat in an armchair by the window reading a newspaper. He looked up as they entered, his face lighting up at the sight of his daughter. Sophie, is it time for our chess game already? Sophie smiled warmly. Not tonight, Dad. I have to help Mom with something, remember? But I brought someone special to visit with you instead. She beckoned Daniel forward. This is Daniel Matthews, John and Mary's boy from the big farm on the hill. Mr. Wilson studied Daniel with surprising clarity. Matthews, eh? I remember you. Skinny kid, always following my Sophie around like a lovesick puppy. Daniel felt his face grow hot. Yes, sir, that was me, Mr. Wilson chuckled. Well, you filled out nicely. Sophie mentioned you were back in town. He gave Daniel a knowing look. She mentions you quite a lot, actually. Dad, Sophie protested, her cheeks flushing. Mr. Wilson winked at Daniel. Women, right? Can't live with them. Can't live without 'em, Daniel finished with a smile, immediately liking the older man. Sophie rolled her eyes at both of them. Daniel's going to stay with you tonight, Dad. You two can watch the baseball game. Mr. Wilson nodded approvingly. Good. Mark was supposed to be here, but that boy's never around when you need him. I have some notes for you, Sophie told Daniel, leading him to a small desk in the corner. She handed him a notebook filled with her neat handwriting. His medication schedule, emergency contacts, what to do if he gets agitated. Daniel glanced through the detailed instructions. Got it. Don't worry. We'll be fine. Sophie hesitated, then reached up and kissed his cheek. Thank you for this. It means more than you know. The touch of her lips against his skin left Daniel momentarily speechless. By the time he recovered, Sophie was already saying goodbye to her father and heading for the door. She works too hard, Mr. Wilson commented once Sophie was gone. Always taking care of everyone else, never herself. Daniel sat in the chair across from him. She's always been that way, even in college. Ah, college, Mr. Wilson's eyes grew distant. She was so excited about becoming a vet. Had her whole life planned out. His expression clouded. Then she came home all of a sudden. Wouldn't say why. Started working all these jobs, taking care of her mother and me. He focused on Daniel again, sudden clarity in his eyes. You know why she came home, don't you? Daniel nodded. She told me about the baby. Mr. Wilson sighed heavily. Broke her heart, losing that little one. She was 5 months along, had already picked out names. Daniel felt a lump in his throat. Did she ever tell you who the father was? Mr. Wilson looked surprised. Why, Mark said it was you. Daniel's blood ran cold. Well, what? Mark told us Sophie got pregnant by her college boyfriend, you, but that you didn't want anything to do with the baby. Said you were too focused on your career. Mr. Wilson's eyes narrowed. Is that not true? Daniel gripped the arms of his chair, fighting to keep his voice steady. No, sir, it's not true. Sophie and I were never romantically involved in college. I had no idea she was pregnant until yesterday, and she told me the father was someone passing through town during spring break. Mr. Wilson frowned, his confusion evident. That's not what Mark said, and when Sophie came home she never corrected him. Why would Mark lie about something like that? Daniel asked. Though he was beginning to form his own theory, Mr. Wilson's eyes clouded again, his moment of clarity fading. Mark always wanted the clinic, ever since he was a boy, but I promised it to Sophie. She had the real gift with animals, you see. So if Sophie was heartbroken and never went back to finish her degree, the clinic would go to Mark, Mr. Wilson finished, surprising Daniel with another moment of lucidity. My son isn't a bad person, but he's always been jealous of his sister, Her talent, her brains, the way people naturally trust her. He leaned forward. You weren't just her friend in college, were you, boy? I can see it in your eyes when you talk about her. Daniel swallowed hard. I loved her, he admitted. I never told her, but I did. I still do. Mr. Wilson nodded sagely. Thought so. Why didn't you tell her? I was afraid of ruining our friendship, and then she was gone and I never got the chance. Well, you're getting a second chance now. Don't waste it. Mr. Wilson picked up the remote control. Now let's watch some baseball. The Cubs are playing. For the next few hours, Daniel sat with Mr. Wilson, watching the game and occasionally helping him to the bathroom or getting him snacks from the small refrigerator in his room. Around 10 p.m., the older man began to grow restless, his earlier clarity fading as confusion set in. Where's Eleanor? He asked anxiously, referring to his wife. She should be home by now. Daniel checked Sophie's notes. This was a common evening behavior. The best approach was gentle redirection. Eleanor is staying with Sophie tonight, Daniel said calmly. Remember, they're having a girls' night. Mr. Wilson seemed to accept this explanation. Sophie works too. Hard, always has. Even as a little girl. Tell me about Sophie as a child, Daniel encouraged, following Sophie's suggestion to engage her father in pleasant memories when he became anxious. Mr. Wilson smiled, settling back in his chair. She was fearless. Climbed every tree, rode every horse, and smart as a whip. Used to follow me on my rounds when I was treating the animals. By the time she was 10, she could diagnose basic ailments better than my assistant. As Mr. Wilson talked, Daniel gained a deeper understanding of the woman Sophie had become, and why the loss of her dream career had been such a devastating blow. Later, after Mr. Wilson had fallen asleep and the night nurse had checked in, Daniel sat in the quiet room, processing everything he'd learned. Mark had lied, not just to him and Sophie, but to their parents as well. He had systematically manipulated the situation to ensure Sophie would never return to school, never claim the veterinary practice that should have been hers, and in the process he had robbed Daniel and Sophie of 10 years they could have spent together. The door opened quietly, and Sophie slipped into the room. She looked surprised to see her father sleeping peacefully. How did it go? She whispered. We had a good evening, Daniel replied softly. Watched the Cubs win, had some ice cream, talked about you. Sophie raised an eyebrow. Should I be worried? Daniel smiled. Not at all. Your dad's pretty proud of you. Sophie's expression softened as she looked at her sleeping father. He's a good man. On his clear days, he's still the wisest person I know. He had a lot of clarity tonight, Daniel said carefully. We had some interesting conversations. Something in his tone made Sophie look at him sharply. What kind of conversations? Sophie, Daniel began, choosing his words carefully. Did you ever tell your parents who the father of your baby was? Sophie froze. No. I was too ashamed to admit it was a one-night stand with someone I barely knew. Why? Because your father thinks I was the father. He says Mark told them I got you pregnant and then abandoned you to pursue my career. The color drained from Sophie's face. What? That's not... Mark wouldn't... But even as she denied it, doubt crept into her expression. Why would Mark lie about something like that? Daniel pressed. Sophie sank into the chair opposite him, her mind clearly racing. To make sure I'd never want to see you again, she whispered. To make sure I'd never go back to school. She looked up at Daniel, anger replacing shock. He took everything from me. My education, my career, you. Daniel reached across and took her hands in his. Not everything. And not forever. Sophie's eyes glistened with unshed tears. All these years, I thought you knew about the baby and wanted nothing to do with me. I was too proud to reach out to beg for help, and I thought you left because you didn't care enough to say goodbye, Daniel admitted. We both believed the worst instead of trusting what we knew about each other. Sophie squeezed his hands. How do we get back those 10 years, Daniel? All that wasted time? We can't, he said simply, but we can make sure we don't waste any more. Before Sophie could respond, her phone buzzed with a text message. She checked it and frowned. It's Mark. He says there's an emergency at the clinic. A horse with colic. Daniel didn't release her hands. Sophie, we need to finish this conversation. There's more you need to know. Sophie looked torn. I have to go. Colic can be fatal if not treated quickly. Then I'm coming with you, Daniel decided. I'm not letting Mark separate us again. They left the care facility after briefing the night nurse, who assured them she would keep a close eye on Mr. Wilson. During the drive to the clinic, Daniel filled Sophie in on everything her father had revealed about Mark's jealousy and manipulation. By the time they arrived, Sophie was seething with a quiet fury Daniel had never seen in her before. She stormed into the clinic with Daniel close behind, ready to confront her brother, and finally uncover the full truth about the past, and perhaps find a way forward into the future they should have shared. The parking lot of Wilson Veterinary Clinic was empty when Sophie and Daniel arrived. No emergency lights, no worried horse owners pacing outside, nothing to indicate the urgent colic case Mark had texted about. Something's not right, Sophie said, her voice tight as she parked her cab and turned off the engine. Daniel nodded, his jaw set. He probably wanted to get you away from your father. Away from me. Sophie's hands gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles white. All these years I've made excuses for him, covered his shifts, handled his paperwork, stepped aside so he could have the career that should have been mine. Her voice broke. And all this time he's been lying to me, to everyone. Daniel reached over and gently pried one of her hands from the wheel, interlacing his fingers with hers. Let's go get the truth, all of it. They walked into the clinic together, hand in hand. The waiting room was dark, but light spilled from under the door to the back office. Sophie pushed it open without knocking. Mark sat at the desk, shuffling through papers. He looked up in surprise, his expression changing to wariness when he spotted Daniel behind his sister. Where's the emergency case? Sophie demanded. The horse with colic? Mark's eyes darted between them. There was a mix-up. Owner called back and said it was just gas, no need for an exam after all. That's funny, Sophie said, her voice dangerously calm. Because I called the after-hours service on my way here. There have been no emergency calls tonight. Mark's face paled slightly. I must have misheard. It's been a long day. Stop lying, Mark, Sophie said, taking a step closer to her brother. I know what you did, what you've been doing for years. Mark stood up quickly, putting the desk between them. What are you talking about? You told Mom and Dad that Daniel was the father of my baby, Sophie said, her voice shaking with rage. You told them he abandoned me when I got pregnant. Mark's expression hardened. So what if I did? It was basically true. You were in love with him, even if he was too blind to see it. And he did abandon you, went off to Chicago without a backward glance. Sophie gasped, and Daniel felt her hand tremble in his. He squeezed it reassuringly, trying to process Mark's words. Sophie had been in love with him. I didn't know about. The baby, Daniel said, his voice low and controlled. I didn't know because Sophie never told me, and apparently you made sure she never would. Mark's laugh was bitter. Oh, please, don't act so innocent. You were leaving anyway. Small-town life was never good enough for Daniel Matthews. Everyone knew you couldn't wait to shake the dirt of this place off your fancy shoes. That's not true, Daniel protested. I left because the one thing keeping me here was gone, Mark scoffed. Right. The academic scholarship and the big city job offer had nothing to do with it. I turned down that job, Daniel revealed. After Sophie disappeared, I looked everywhere for her. I called and texted for months. I even came back to town searching for her, but her roommate, your girlfriend, told me Sophie didn't want to be found. Mark's expression flickered. Jen was just protecting Sophie. You broke her heart. No, Mark, Sophie interrupted, her voice quiet but firm. You broke my heart. And Daniel's. You told me he stopped calling after 2 months, that he was dating some banker's daughter in Chicago. You made me believe he didn't care. I was protecting you, Mark insisted. He was never going to stay, Sophie. Guys like him don't end up with girls like us. That wasn't your decision to make, Sophie said, moving closer to the desk. You had no right to interfere in my life. Mark's face reddened. I had every right. Who was there when you lost the baby? Who drove you to doctors? Appointments? Who helped with Mom after her stroke? Not him. He jabbed a finger at Daniel. Me, your family. Sophie's voice was steel. And who told Dad I should give up vet school? Who convinced Mom I was too fragile to go back? Who took the clinic that should have been mine? Mark flinched as if she'd slapped him. The clinic was always going to be mine. Dad just felt sorry for you. That's a lie, Daniel interjected. Your father told me tonight that he promised the practice to Sophie. He said she had the real gift with animals. Mark's face contorted with anger and hurt. Dad doesn't know what he's saying anymore. His mind is gone. He has moments of perfect clarity, Daniel countered. Tonight was one of them. Mark sank back into his chair, deflated. It doesn't matter now anyway. The practice is legally mine. The property, the client list, everything. I don't want the clinic, Mark, Sophie said, her voice softening slightly. Not anymore. What I want is the truth. And I want my life back, the one you stole from me with your lies. Mark looked up at his sister, really looked at her perhaps for the first time in years. What do you want me to say, Sophie? That I was jealous? Fine, I was jealous. You were always the smart one, the talented one, the one everyone loved. Dad never thought I was good enough. That's not true, Sophie said. Dad loves you. He's always been proud of you. Mark's laugh was hollow. Sure. That's why he promised the clinic to his darling daughter instead of his only son. He promised it to whoever earned it, Sophie corrected. And I worked for it, Mark. I studied harder than anyone in my class. I sacrificed everything for that dream. And then you got pregnant and came home, Mark said, his voice softening slightly. I saw an opportunity, and I took it. I'm not proud. Have what I did, Sophie, but I can't change it now. Sophie stared at her brother for a long moment. Then, without warning, she walked around the desk and did something that surprised both men. She pulled Mark into a hug. You're my brother, she said, her voice thick with emotion. Nothing will ever change that, but I can't forgive you until you make this right. Mark stiffened in her embrace, then slowly raised his arms to return it. How? He asked, his voice small like a child's. Sophie stepped back, wiping away a tear. Start by telling Mom and Dad the truth, all of it, and then... She took a deep breath. Make me a partner in the clinic. Not an assistant or an employee, a full partner. Mark's eyes widened. Sophie, I can't. The finances are a mess because you're a terrible businessman, Sophie interrupted bluntly. We both know I've been keeping this place afloat for years, while you take most of the credit and all of the profit. Mark glanced at Daniel, who was watching the exchange with a mixture of admiration and awe. And what about him? Is he staying, or is this just another brief visit before he runs back to his real life? Daniel stepped forward, placing a hand on Sophie's shoulder. My real life is wherever Sophie is, he said simply. If she'll have me. Sophie turned to look at him, her eyes shining with unshed tears. You don't mean that. Your company, your life in Chicago, can be managed from anywhere, Daniel finished. The truth is, Sophie, I've been successful but not happy. Not since I lost you. Mark cleared his throat awkwardly. So what, you're just going to move back to Oak Ridge and play farmer again? Daniel met his gaze steadily. Actually, I've been thinking about investing in a local veterinary practice, one that specializes in large animals and farm calls. With the right partners, it could become the premier clinic in the county. Mark's expression shifted from hostility to cautious interest. What kind of investment? Mark, Sophie warned. Don't even think about it. Daniel squeezed her shoulder. Hear me out. The Matthews farm has always been a major client for your family's practice. What if we expanded that relationship? New facilities, modern equipment, maybe even a specialized surgery center for large animals. That would take hundreds of thousands of dollars, Mark said, but Daniel could see the wheels turning in his head. I happen to have that kind of money, Daniel replied with a small smile. But my investment comes with conditions. First, Sophie becomes a full partner, starting immediately. Second, she returns to school to finish her DVM with the practice covering all expenses. And third, he fixed Mark with a stern look. You make amends to your sister, to your parents, and to me. Mark stared at the desktop for a long moment, then nodded slowly. I can live with those terms. He looked up at Sophie. I am sorry, sis. I never meant for it to go this far. Sophie's expression remained skeptical. Actions, Mark, not words. I need to see real change. Mark nodded again. Starting tomorrow, I promise. As they left the clinic, the night air was cool and clean. Sophie was quiet as they walked to her car, processing everything that had happened. You didn't have to do that, she finally said as they reached the parking lot. Offer to invest in the clinic. Daniel turned to face her. I didn't do it for Mark. I did it for you. For us. Sophie looked up at him, moonlight silvering her features. There's an us? I hope so, Daniel said softly. I've loved you since we were 20, Sophie. I just never had the courage to tell you. Sophie's breath caught. You loved me back then, Daniel nodded. Why do you think I was always following you around like, what did your dad call it? A lovesick puppy? A smile tugged at the corner of Sophie's mouth. I thought you just needed help with biology. Daniel laughed. I aced biology. I just wanted to be near you. Sophie's smile faded. So much wasted time, she whispered. Not wasted, Daniel corrected, taking her hands in his. Just delayed. We're here now. That's what matters. Sophie studied his face in the moonlight. Are you really staying? What about your company? I have good people running it, Daniel said, and with modern technology, I can manage my part from here. The real question is, do you want me to stay? Instead of answering, Sophie rose on her tiptoes and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was tentative at first, then deepened as 10 years of unspoken feelings poured through the connection. Daniel's arms wrapped around her waist, pulling her closer, as her hands came up to frame his face. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless. I'll take that as a yes, Daniel murmured against her hair. Sophie laughed, the sound lighter and more carefree than Daniel had heard since his return. That's a definite yes. The next few weeks passed in a whirlwind of activity. True to his word, Mark confessed everything to his parents. Mrs. Wilson, who had recovered enough from her stroke to understand the situation, was furious with her son, but ultimately relieved that the truth was finally out. Mr. Wilson, during one of his lucid days, simply nodded as if he'd known all along and said, "About time you grew up, boy." The partnership agreement for the clinic was drawn up, with Sophie officially taking her rightful place as co-owner. She also enrolled in an accelerated veterinary program that would allow her to complete her degree while continuing to work. Daniel, meanwhile, met with Turner Management and renewed their contract to oversee the Matthews farm, but with some significant changes. He would be taking a more active role in the farm's operations while continuing to run his irrigation company remotely. He also purchased a small house in town, not as grand as the family farmhouse, but cozy and just a short drive from both the Yao farm and the veterinary clinic. Mrs. Atkins insisted on helping him furnish it, declaring his city taste to be absolutely useless for country living. On a warm evening in late summer, Sophie and Daniel sat on the porch of his new house, watching fireflies dance across the lawn. Her head rested comfortably on his shoulder, his arm wrapped around her waist in a gesture that had already become familiar. "Mum's breathing is better today," Sophie said. "The new medication seems to be working." Daniel pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "That's good news. And your dad?" "Clearer than he's been in months. He asked when we're getting married." Daniel chuckled. "Smart man. Did you tell him I haven't proposed yet?" Sophie sat up to look at him, one eyebrow raised. "Yet?" Daniel's smile was warm but nervous. "I was going to wait. Do it properly, with a ring and a romantic dinner." "Since when have we done anything the traditional way?" Sophie teased. Daniel laughed. "Fair point." His expression grew serious. "I don't want to rush you, Sophie. We're still getting to know each other again." Sophie shook her head. "We lost 10 years, Daniel. I don't want to lose one more day." Daniel reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. "I've been carrying this around for a week, waiting for the perfect moment." Sophie's eyes widened. "Daniel?" He opened the box to reveal a simple but elegant diamond ring. "It was my mother's. Dad gave it to me before he died, said I should save it for when I found someone special." He took Sophie's hand. "I found her in college, lost her, and by some miracle found her again. I'm not letting you go this time, Sophie Wilson. Tears glistened in Sophie's eyes as Daniel slid from the porch swing to one knee in front of her. "Will you marry me, Sophie? Make a home with me here, build a life together, maybe even a family someday?" Sophie's voice was steady despite her tears. "Yes, to all of it, yes." As Daniel slipped the ring onto her finger and pulled her into his arms, the setting sun painted the sky in brilliant shades of gold and pink. The farm fields stretched out around them, promising a rich harvest to come. Later that evening, after sharing their news with Mrs. Atkins, who claimed she'd known all along, and calling Sophie's parents, her mother cried, her father said, "Well, it's about time," they returned to the farmhouse where Daniel had grown up. Hand in hand, they walked through the rooms that had witnessed his childhood, now standing empty but filled with memories. "We could live here," Daniel suggested. "If you wanted to. There's plenty of room for a family." Sophie leaned against him. "I'd like that. It feels right somehow, bringing the house back to life." Daniel led her to the back porch, where the porch swing still hung from sturdy chains. They sat together, gently swaying as they gazed out at the land that had shaped both their lives. "Do you remember that day in college?" Daniel asked. "When we were studying for finals and you asked me where I saw myself in 10 years. Sophie nodded. "You said you'd be running your own agriculture technology company, changing farming forever." Daniel smiled. "And I am. But I forgot the most important part of that dream." He lifted their joined hands, kissing her knuckles just above the ring. "You were always supposed to be in it with me." "Well," Sophie said, resting her head on his shoulder, "I'm here now. Better late than never." As night fell over the farm, wrapping them in a blanket of stars, Daniel and Sophie remained on the porch swing, planning their future together, a future that had been delayed but never truly denied. The seeds of their love, planted years ago, in college and nurtured by forgiveness and truth, were finally ready to bloom. In the morning, they would face the practical challenges of merging their lives, his business, her clinic, their family obligations. But for tonight, they simply held each other, making up for lost time and savoring the sweet harvest of a love that had endured, despite everything that had tried to destroy it. "I love you," Daniel whispered, as Sophie's eyes grew heavy with sleep. "I think I've loved you since the first day you corrected my answer in biology class." Sophie smiled against his chest. "I love you too, always have, always will." And in that moment, on the porch of the farmhouse that would soon be their home, Daniel knew with absolute certainty that he had found his way back, not just to Oak Ridge Valley, but to the place his heart had never truly left. The end.